Good evening and welcome again to Solutionary TV. I am your host, Dr. Tatiana. Remember, our purpose is to educate about pertinent global issues outside the mainstream narrative while presenting guests involved in solutionary innovations, practices, and inventive strategies for our transitioning society. This evening, our special guest is Niti Bali. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She is really a connoisseur of many things regenerative. Niti is a fervent advocate of regenerative architecture, agriculture, and has founded the Farm to Fork Meat Riot that raises awareness and educates about the dangers of our current industrialized food system. She is the founder of Farm to Fork Meat, a CSA, which provides the community with access to pre-vetted food from local farmers, cattle ranchers, and local fishermen, and their weekly offerings in support of local collaboration for health and prosperity. Niti also has a podcast, Niti the Farmacist with an F, F-A-R-M-A-C-I-S-T, where she shares her personal journey into radical awareness of the shortcomings of our current systems and coaches her audience into critical thinking that's supportive education about how to better advocate for oneself and family as it pertains to health and the community. Welcome, Niti.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate that.
It is really a thrill to have you here. I'm a big supporter of Niti. I've been to some of her charities. I have been involved in her CSA. And I've got to tell you, it takes a very dedicated soul to decide that what is available in our current supermarkets, what's available even in our niche markets, is just not enough, that it's just not sourced or that it hasn't been properly vetted. So there's quite a story I'm eager to have her share with you tonight. Niti, work with our audience here. We really want to do a lot of educating in this particular segment. There is so much misinformation about what food is and what it isn't, what foodstuffs are that are packaged, what's the difference between getting local produce as opposed to maybe even organic, quote unquote, organic from Mexico. Our listeners are probably confused because who determines, within the USDA or the FDA, what actually qualifies as what? How do certifications come about? Many of our listeners may also be aware that there is cross-pollination from, some of the monoculture and certainly heavily sprayed crops that are out there. So can you educate us a little bit about your vetting process and why that became so important to you?
So that's a lot of questions.
Start at the beginning.
Why do I do this? I do it because we had a child when, in 2007, my daughter was diagnosed with esthesioneuroblastoma, and she was 2 years old. And I come from a family of physicians, so they're both holistic and allopathic physicians in our family. And I think that anytime that we have any type of health issue, then we're always seeking the most holistic route first. And in her case, it was really shocking because she had a head full of tumor, and who's,
wow,
ready to hear that. I don't know. It was very shocking. I know that probably the first, I don't know that we weren't still in shock 30 days, going into it. But anyway, why do I do it? It's because of our experience with Meenakshi. If anybody's interested in listening to that whole story, because that would take forever, it's in the first couple of episodes of my podcast. You can hear
we'll make sure that on the website solutionarytv.com that we have a full list of any of the sites you'd like to direct the audience to. Absolutely. Yeah, we'll take care of that.
So, I think that we've always been very conscious about our food. My grandfather was a renowned homeopathic physician when he was living, and it was always important that we ate in balance, and so I've always cooked. Like that was just not like a no brainer kind of thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, until I started looking into working with the farms and speaking with more people, I had no idea people weren't cooking every day. It was pretty shocking for me, actually.
Right.
And because for me, I couldn't understand what you do. How do you get up in the morning and leave your house and you don't eat anything, or you don't feed your children anything? So, I mean, that's where I'm coming from in terms of meals. And when we were going through trying to figure out what was happening with Mina, then, I got more involved in really wanting to trace back, I think, like all of our food and all the components. And that is what, I mean, I was always going to farmers markets, I think, just generally speaking. But, I have to be honest and say, well, I never thought about going to a farmer's market to find meat because you generally don't see meat there. It's, people most of the time are only going to find produce at a farmer's market.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, when I started looking for meat, it was very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And, it also never occurred to me not to eat meat. And that's kind of funny because, I was raised mostly vegetarian because we're Indian.
Right.
But we always had some meat, and going back to my grandfather, he would say, he told my mom even, he said, look, you're going to the United States. So you always eat based on your geographic location. You don't eat based on just religion or anything. And so he told her, he said, in America, they eat beef for some reason. So make sure you eat beef once a week. And so she always did incorporate that. So for me, it was just never something I was ever going to think of like, oh, I should not eat meat. I should just find the highest quality meat, or I should know what the cleanest meat is. And I didn't know how to do that without going from farm to farm to figure that out.
So that's really how you went about it. You actually took on this personal pilgrimage to understand how the food was sourced, how the animals were cared for, how the farmers grew their crops. That must have been an enormous undertaking. Let's educate our audience a little bit about the difference between organic versus regenerative versus industrialized agriculture. If you can just kind of synopsize how all three of those fit in and how you ended up directing your CSA.
Sure. So, I think it all goes back to holistic. So I said that, he was homeopathic. We grew up with this holistic mindset. And I don't know. I mean, is it okay if I kind of go into holistic for just a moment? And
sure.
Because I think people don't realize. I mean, the first thing I tell everybody is that we are embedded in nature, and until you accept and acknowledge that you are embedded in nature, that you have to be one with nature, then I don't think that people have a proper respect for what's happening right now. Everyone's like, for example, with the food thing, everyone comes to me and they're like, well, where's your scientific proof that this food's better than the other food? Well, I think people have forgotten that. I think this next generation has no idea probably that science is actually the study of nature, like trying to break down nature, and nature is always whole. And, for an example, I'm a human being, but I'm actually, like millions and billions of cells. And then that creates me as a whole.
Right.
And like, for example, if you say something that hurts my feelings, it's not just in my mind, my entire body feels that.
Oh, exactly. Yes.
So, when I'm saying holistic, I mean, if we're eating food that isn't coming from the soil and isn't respecting the soil, then you have nothing. Like, there is no medicine, there is no nutrition.
That really gets into the regenerative concept too, doesn't it, Niti?
Right. So going into that, if you understand that nature must be whole first, and you have to look at it from a whole view versus, you can't just look for the vitamin C and just look for the vitamin D, when you're trying to nourish yourself. You need to look at the whole. And so when you're doing that, then that's what I do with the farms. I mean, when I was going out to look for clean animals or the healthiest animals, I had kind of given up my trust of what was in the grocery store because I couldn't trace it back. And so I had decided, if I don't know where it came from and I can't talk to the person who's raising it and I can't produce it myself,
Right.
then we just won't eat it.
Which is revolutionary for this era in the United States, isn't it? Because a lot of it's out of sight, out of mind. It's packaged, it's pretty, or it's already cooked for us and it's shipped and thought out, or, coming through the line. Now, we have a lot of interested listeners in our audience that don't understand the difference between, let's just talk about organic and regenerative.
Okay.
And the standards around organic. Just synopsize, encapsulate that, because I know that could really go wild. But a lot of people think I bought organic, therefore that means I got the best of the best. And look, it was on sale over at the Food Lion or,
Right.
at the Sam's Club. Talk a little bit about what's going on with organic and why regenerative may be a better route to go.
So organic is unsustainable. The reason it's unsustainable is because the soil requires amendments when you're going to do something organically. And what I mean is that the soil is still dead. You have this malnourished soil, and then in an organic situation, they're putting amendments in. I don't know how these human beings decide that they know what the amendments should be for the soil to be, nourished enough versus regenerative. And in regenerative agriculture, we're working with living soils. So living soils you cannot have without a complete balance on the farm. So that means you have to have livestock. You have to have, which I have to say, like, people are not understanding these days that you can't have living soil without livestock. You just can't. It's impossible.
So you're talking about the fertilizer, you're talking about the movement, you're talking about them, moving the soil underneath their hooves, that type of thing.
Yeah, actually, I think that it's very interesting. I would really love to invite people to research Alan Savory's work. He's someone who I've learned a lot. I mean, just a lot from. He's been working with regenerative agriculture and like creating these living soils since the 50s. I don't know him, haven't met him. I just follow his work. I'm a huge fan. And I think that anyone who starts following his work will be, he actually does a TED Talk. I think everyone might maybe want to start with that. And he's talking about how he's using livestock to mimic the way that, animals used to travel across the earth and, mimic the what do you call it?
Not, they're migratory patterns.
Yeah, migratory patterns.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So, and so, what he found is that there's, like you can take one animal down a path, back and forth, and you have basically what would be the destruction of the land, right? And I think anyone who has a dog, for example, in a backyard, they can see the path of the dog, and it's just kind of tearing the yard up. But if you were to put more dogs on that path and you rested the land and you timed it out in a different way, then you would find that, having them moving forward over a certain period of time, then that area of land is actually healthier than it was before.
Joel Salatin talks about that in a lot of his work and on his tours. I know you're familiar with him, and it's about managing the land. A good steward knows how to manage the land, manage the animals. We know that organic is been the feature. It's been kind of the niche. That's what we've wanted to do. Can you talk a little bit about what our listeners can look for if they are trying to find food that maybe fits the clean bill that organic is meant to create? It's meant to be glyphosate free. It's meant to be with soil that is healthy, that's been turned over, that has good, homeostatic, organisms in it. It's living soil.
But I don't think it's living soil. It's amended soil. It's not living soil, and I don't know that they say that anywhere, that it is actually living soil. I think that's one of the, I think it's interesting that you can put anything on a website, even the FDA and the USDA on the website can write that, their standard for organic means pasture based.
Mm-hmm.
When the truth is, I would like for someone to find one of those farmers because they don't exist. Organic is still being raised in a CAFO situation, meaning the confined animal feeding operations. The difference is that they're supposed to be giving them, like organic, the way I understand it still right now, and I'm not talking about based upon what I understand from reading the definition of it. I'm talking about what I understand based on what's being practiced with my boots on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a big difference between what they're trying to sell everyone versus what's actually happening on the ground.
Right.
So I haven't found a farm yet that's certified organic that is also using living soil.
And is that nationwide? Is that a global issue at this point? Or is this what you've come to find locally in North Carolina as you've been sourcing and trying to bring the very best quality to your particular CSA members?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't found that here because it's interesting. You can have organic certified produce farms, for example. Well, obviously, they don't have any living soil. They don't have any animals on the farm. And they're still monocultures, and that's the problem with organic.
Explain that. Help our listeners understand, because we did want to get into the differences between what we consider to be ideal as we're moving forward with solutionary practices as it pertains to food. A lot of our listeners don't really understand what's not working about our industrialized food system. So explain monoculture a little bit.
So nature doesn't thrive on monoculture. Nature thrives on diversity. I mean, I think, even babies or little preschool children know that there are no two snowflakes that look the same.
Right.
And so, the industrialized food system think about it. They've tried to industrialize life. I find it amazing that, like when people shop from my CSA, for example, nothing looks the same. Nothing's repeatable.
Right.
And a lot of people find it frustrating, for example, if they're getting beef from me because they enjoyed the steak that they got, this month, and then the next month, the steak tastes different and it's completely different. And I'm like, well, it's a different creature. It's not even the same animal.
Mm-hmm.
And, and they've never had to experience that before because industrialized food is homogenized.
Mm-hmm.
What they are doing is they have this cookie cutter recipe for life, which is crazy. I mean, doesn't that just sound insane? Like, do you need scientific proof? I'm not sure. I don't know that I have the audacity, I think, to push people to think about these things. I don't know no one's saying these things, right? I'm going to say all the things. If you listen to my podcast too, Tatiana, like I'm saying things that nobody wants to say. Everybody's trying to sugarcoat everything and allow everyone to find some contentment with their denial. And I'm just not going to do that because I feel like that's a lie. And I really want people to know the truth because, let's be honest. I've lost a child. I just can't. I'm sick of watching people suffer and die in front of me, all around me, all the time. And
it's true. Boldness is called for, and I think that we've got more boldness than we have in our area of educating the public about food, about government, about what's going on with corporate, what's going on with our monetary system. This isn't an area to pull back and try to sugarcoat. I'm going to use your term. But I think that when we come out and say, hey, organic isn't really necessarily organic, they're doing tests and they're finding out that your organic from Mexico or your organic from California that's USDA certified has actually been, cross breeding and cross pollinating with some of the neighbor crops, and now there is no guarantee of that, or that the soil wasn't really healthy. Want to give them a little bit of hope.
Yeah, well, okay, so let me say this. Here's some hope, everybody. Stop buying, get out of the grocery store. I say this continuously as well.
Mm-hmm.
Find someone local that you can put your eyes on their land and just buy from them, support them, tell them what you want, because you know what, farmers are just waiting to rise to the occasion to produce this regenerative food for people, but the consumer's uneducated. They don't know that they should be seeking that,
Mm-hmm.
And then people say to me, that I'm some type of food elitist, and it's too expensive to eat real food. Well, that's nonsense. I know that the average family of 4 spends $300 to $400 a week on groceries or on food.
Is that an American standard number?
It's an American standard number. And, everybody can just be honest with themselves. I'm not in your wallet. I'm just saying, it's impossible these days. I don't know where you could be eating that you're not spending $300 to $400 a week, collectively between whatever it is that you're buying at a store and eating at restaurants or whatever you're doing. Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, I know that you can buy regenerative food. And by the way, regenerative food costs the same across the whole country, just so you know. Like grass-fed beef here, New York, Texas, California, it's the same. Per pound, it's running the same.
So explain to our audience what regenerative means as opposed to maybe importing it from somewhere else. If you're saying, I'm going to help you understand the concept of regenerative so it's worth your while to seek out a CSA or a local farmer, what would that mean for them?
Well, it's respecting light cycles, for one thing. If anybody understands circadian rhythm and the fact that we need to eat based on our circadian rhythm, then they would know the importance of eating locally. What's regenerative? Eat within your hunting range. Mm-hmm.
Within 100 miles is very often what is said. Sometimes within 50, if you can do that well, correct?
Right. I mean, I think that if you can get to them on a regular weekly basis, it's good enough. I don't think we need to weigh and measure all that out. Whatever you're comfortable, however far you're comfortable driving. I mean, I would say you need to probably leave your 4-mile radius. Mm-hmm. Right. Everybody is like, oh my gosh, it's so far away. Well, I think you can pretty much find clean food. Farmers are bringing things, so that you don't have to travel probably more than 10 miles. And 10 miles is nothing, to be able to put your eyes on a human being that can tell you from beginning to end everything about their food. That's one step of regenerative. Mm-hmm. The second step is that you should be able to see their soil. And if they don't have animals on their soil, then they're not doing anything correctly at all. Maybe they're producing produce to sell and they don't have any meat to sell, but they have birds and, other livestock on their land. Mm-hmm. And that's enough. You can't have living soil without livestock. And so, and I'm going to go ahead and say this other controversial piece, FYI.
Get ready.
Everybody brace yourself. Well, because I'm getting yelled at continuously, even as we were sharing this show, and making the announcement about the show. Immediately people are, sending me messages saying, well, just go vegan if you're worried about all of it. Well, guess what, people? I don't know. My question for the vegans is this. One, you're fighting for animal rights, supposedly, which, by the way, wasn't the way that veganism started. Veganism started as a political stand against the CAFOs, which, by the way, I'm completely on board with. Mm-hmm, okay? Mm-hmm. And that was why it began. And now it's been convoluted. And it has turned into this.
Well, it's a chemistry project. It's another global effort that means a lot to people on a moral level. And so
But it's not moral. Okay, what do you want us to do with the livestock? I mean, you're sitting here saying that you want to protect the animals, but at the same time, you don't want to consume the animals, and you don't want to let anyone consume the animals, and you don't want the animals to have any purpose, including not working on the farms or whatever, and you also don't want anybody to consume honey, which is insanity if you want to eat vegetables. And then I haven't met a vegan yet who's eating vegetables in as much volume as I am. Mm-hmm. It's that. So no, I will.
It's a point of irritation for you at this point because you feel like it has to do with maybe less education and a little bit more bravado at this point.
It is someone just wanting to have an argument. And I don't argue with vegans because I don't care if you want to be vegan. If you want to be vegan, if you feel better being vegan, then, awesome. Yeah. I think you should do it. I'm not judging how anybody eats. I'm not telling you to be vegetarian or vegan or anything. I'm telling you not to buy fake chemistry project food. That is it.
So where would they start? So we don't have everyone that knows where to find a CSA. You created one. You obviously know how to network. You started at the farmers markets. Where would you tell people to start rather than going directly into their grocery store, into their Whole Foods or whatever?
I mean, go to a farmers market. Talk to the farmers who are there. And then you'll find out very quickly who it is that's, my question for all of them when I first started was, I want to buy from you, but I'm not going to buy anything from you until I can come visit your farm.
Okay, so that's a great place to start, isn't it? Ask if you can have a drop-in visit.
Right. And it was amazing to me how many people would let me visit and how many people wouldn't. And then it was even more interesting how many people, so many people would say, yeah, you can come, but then they would never schedule it. And so I would just never buy anything from them. It was just very simple, and then I would find out, who's actually doing a good job and who's not. The other thing is, I find the majority of the farmers are very honest. I don't want anyone to feel like you're not going to be able to figure this out because you're going to be continuously lied to. I don't believe that. There are many, many farmers that are very proudly going to tell you all the chemicals that they spray all over their land. And, we just say thank you very much and keep moving, And, but I think that if you find someone who is, rather than say, are you organic? Because they're not going to be organic. Because they can't afford to be organic if they're at your local farmer's market most of the time.
Right.
Okay. So let's be clear about what organic means, is that it is a form of industrialized food production, which is not what I call agriculture.
Which is still typically monoculture, correct?
It's still monoculture. It's still industrialized. The government just wants to have a piece of that as well. When actually it should be the people, the farmers, the grassroots. It's, everyone needs to be doing their food local on a grassroots level. There is no reason. I remember growing up, Tatiana, you don't have to be that old right now to remember a time when you couldn't cross state lines with produce.
I remember the checkpoints between Utah and California, which was a regular familial migration for me. And I remember them asking, do you have cherries? Do you have citrus? Do you have produce? Because they wanted to check it. There was, I think, more issues around fruit flies and pests and things that were moved along. But it's true.
Right.
Now
but
we
consumers
have
could do
restrictions.
it. I mean, you could, as an individual, go get oranges from Florida. I grew up in North Carolina. I could drive to Florida. I could get my oranges and I could bring them back. But there's a completely different thing with a semi-truck going to Florida. I'm talking about big box. You couldn't big box carry produce from one state to another state. You could, as a consumer, go get your box of oranges because you're in Florida and you're driving home, or something of that nature.
Right.
And I think that even now, people can, consumers can cross state lines and shop and then go back home. That's not what this is about. But from a commercial distribution point of view, from an industrialized distribution point of view, if it's not grown within your state, within your hunting range, why are you eating it? That goes back to the education that I give people about circadian rhythm. You can't have think about it. You're in Chicago. You can't be eating bananas all the time and expect to thrive. So instead, what are people doing now? Now you have these holistic physicians that are saying they're villainizing certain fruits and vegetables, saying they're too heavy in starch or what have you. Americans don't need one more reason not to eat fruits and vegetables.
So are you suggesting then that maybe the way that our nation and the monoculture that has kind of set the precedent here has us eating certain things that our bodies build up intolerances to, or they're not picked necessarily fresh because they have to be distributed so far over a certain amount of lines, or we're just eating too much of them and our bodies are not getting the same nourishment out of them, based on how they're grown, how often we're eating them, that type of thing. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I'm saying respect seasons. Respect your local light cycles, because right now, for example, here in Raleigh, it's summertime. We have long light cycles. There's just no reason for people not to eat any of the fruit that's grown locally in abundance. And you can overeat it and it wouldn't be a big deal. The problem is that people are only eating like 5 vegetables and 5 fruits that they get out of the grocery store.
Right.
And they're not eating, people don't know what to do if you can't have a banana all year long. There aren't bananas all year long.
It's just conditioned. It's conditioned programming. We saw the food pyramid when we were in elementary school, and we go to the store, and one of the first things that you see when you come in year round are bananas, right? We're expecting that those are going to be available. So you're trying to gear our audience and our listeners to pay attention to the seasons, eat in the season that we happen to be in, and that our bodies know from a very primal place to be acclimated to be able to better digest and make better use of those nutrients. Seek out local farmers. Would you still suggest going to farmers markets first, or how would you recommend someone going for vetting a CSA?
So there's a couple of ways. They could go to a local farmers market. I'm not bashing markets and saying that farmers markets, are bad. I'm saying that you have to know the questions to ask when you go there. So I go over that in great detail on my podcast. If people are listening and tuning in, they'll be able to really, learn every question that they could possibly ask to, vet out chicken or vet out beef or whatever. But produce, I think is pretty simple. You want to know that they have livestock on the land. Do they have living soil? I mean, I think if you ask a farmer if they have living soil, then you're going to get more information than if you say, are you organic? Because they can't talk about that if they, because they're not certified. But if you say to them, do you spray chemicals on your land? And if they say, yeah, then say, okay, thanks, and keep moving.
Okay.
Just go to the next one.
Just a snapshot. What would you say
but
to be really aware of then in terms of chemicals? What would you say is really the most toxic? Because we've got people that they're going to graduate slowly into this kind of thinking. It's an educational process just as it has been for you. What do they really want to avoid when they're dealing with
Tatiana,
local farmers?
You're talking to the wrong girl, because how much poison is good enough for you? I
like that answer.
Yeah,
that's a great answer.
I
define the poisons that they would know by name, are maybe those that they need to be aware of.
They shouldn't be spraying anything on their land. I mean, if an animal is desiccating on the land and they have a diverse crop, they don't need to spray. And if the farmer doesn't know that, and they don't know how to do that, they just don't know how to be regenerative. So I was going to also add that you can go to local harvest.org, punch in your zip code, and get a longer list of farms that you can call to vet. You can also go to eatwild.com, I believe. Google Eat Wild, I'm sure it'll come up.
Excellent.
And I'm working on an app, by the way, Tatiana.
Oh, good.
Because I'm working on an app to put together across the country so people can put in their zip code and know if I've vetted the farm out. Because the government doesn't meet my standard. I tell everybody all the time, you know what? I don't comply. I do not comply with the FDA or the USDA because they do not meet my standards. Because they do allow spraying, for one thing. Do you know that your organic produce and organic wheat, I'm going to talk about wheat specifically. There is no grain right now that's clean. So being vegan and vegetarian at this moment is so dangerous. And most people end up, I'm working with actually a lot of recovering vegans. And vegetarianism is different because it still incorporates butter and, a lot of times they'll still incorporate dairy or they may be pescatarian a little bit more than just
some
vegetarian.
Healthy fats and that type of thing.
Yeah, they have to have some healthy grass-based animal fats. And the reason is because animals are offering vitamins and minerals that they've processed through their system that they make bioavailable for us that we can't do on our own. So that's reason number 567 that veganism doesn't work. Initially when people become vegan, then they become healthier, they feel better. Well, I think that it's a no-brainer that you remove animals less healthy than you are from your diet, and all of a sudden you're going to be better. Of course you are.
So explain to our vegans, our vegetarians, and our omnivores, what is going on with our grain right now when we thought maybe that it was an organic source? Because this is really a big topic going on right now.
Right. People have actually been really upset with me about saying that wheat is a drug. And, they come up to me and say things like, well, that is of God. And I'm like, yeah, well, isn't everything? But wheat currently and many other grains are being harvested by being desiccated with glyphosate, which is Roundup.
Yes.
So what I want people to think about
it's a drying process, isn't it, Niti? They're trying to speed dry them in preparation to be, made into breads and cereals, that type of thing.
Okay, so let's just talk about this. This really brings up for me socioeconomic and human rights issues, okay? So I don't think people understand the labor that's required to harvest grain correctly. If you're going to harvest wheat correctly, meaning like not any poison, okay? Which I think people think that organic is, which is the lie. is that would require a lot of labor. First, someone has to go out into the field. They have to gather the wheat. They have to tie it. They have to allow it to dry. Or if you're going to use some modern methods, you could collect the wheat and you could soak it and sprout it like in a dehydrator. I mean, can you imagine how laborious that is? And who's going to invest in that? And if they did, I promise you that if anyone who knows how much labor costs these days, or you know what your own value is, what, you know, like what would you work for, what's the minimum wage even, then you can't have wheat for 50 cents a pound.
Mm-hmm.
If you know, if so people really need to wonder, you know, I'm talking 50 cents a pound. Okay, how much wheat is required to make a bread loaf? Like at least 2 to 3 cups. Okay? And so if you were to actually go out and gather some wheat and thrash it and dry it and do everything by hand yourself, you're going to end up with like barely a cup of wheat grain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to make that into, you know, the flour. So I don't know. Can you do the math on that?
I think it makes our heads ache just at the concept of doing it. We know that how our wheat is processed and a lot of our grains are processed in the United States is not a global method. We know that a lot of the European countries, Scandinavian countries, South American countries are still kind of old schooling how they process their grain. But here in America, we've been taught, Niti, wouldn't you say that food should be cheap and fast, and so when we do see something that's been sprouted, maybe a loaf in our local Sprouts, and it's a sprouted grain, and the loaf is $5.99, $6.99 for that loaf of bread, as opposed to a 99-cent, you know, supposedly Nature's Whole, whatever the brand happens to be. We don't understand the mechanics in how one was grown and fed and nourished and harvested and then produced, as opposed to the other. So what you're really going into is some of the mechanics of this.
Mm-hmm. So even that sprouted bread that you're talking about, for $5.99 for the loaf, I mean, it's still not addressing the labor that's involved to do it correctly. And by the way, they're not using correctly harvested wheat to sprout. They're still using organic wheat. So what is the difference between organic wheat and the regular wheat in the store? Is that instead of using glyphosate, they're using vinegar, which seems like a natural drying agent. But how do you make vinegar? They're making vinegar. It's a corn-based vinegar made with genetically modified corn.
It's a corn-based vinegar. It's not a white vinegar or an apple cider vinegar. It's a corn-based vinegar.
Well, it's going to be the cheapest vinegar they can produce and harvest it with, because they're desiccating an entire field,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to buy it for $6 sprouted and complain about it. So I don't know.
Well, I think that a lot of people don't understand why a loaf would cost $6.99, and so it isn't even going to be worth their time. And we got to give them. Remember, we got to give them an insertion point.
So let's talk about how the government is subsidizing. Okay, let's do our history. If you guys think back to post-World War II, it was the industrial age,
Mm-hmm.
and America had decided that we were going to feed the world, which is a great strategy, right? It's great military strategy. It's also very noble,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's on board and everyone's excited about it. And women have left the home now, and they're all working, and we're coming out of the Great Depression, and everything's awesome, right? Well, the government started subsidizing the grain, and if they're going to give this grain away to everybody in the world, then I don't know, do you really think that our government's going to make it a priority that it's going to be the highest quality nutrition? I mean, we all know this. How about this? Let me make you think about this. Health insurance. Everybody knows that you do not want to be on a government program
Mm-hmm.
for health insurance. Everyone will, like, without thinking, they will invest in private health insurance, correct?
I think that that's probably very likely.
So why is it okay to pay an insurance company to be responsible for your health and you not take any responsibility yourself, and invest that money instead in highest quality nutrition to make sure that your inputs are not imitation or chemical, and you're going to allow someone else to take responsibility, and I'm talking about the government, because my CSA, I tell everybody, we do not comply with the USDA or the FDA. And I also tell them, you have no recourse. So you don't have to participate. And in fact, anybody who's in my CSA knows that I have probably done more to push them away than I have to include them. Not because I don't want to grow the number of people that we're nourishing and help my farmers with their volume of sales, but because we're in a battle right now with our boots on the ground, and we're not going to take on the government. Everyone has, but consumers have the right to choose. And, consumers can change everything.
Well, that's the whole point here. We really want to educate our audience, the consumers, because we were all raised to be consumers. Our last guest, we talked about consumerism and commodification. Seeing the world through commodification rather than having this very happy, very healed, very sentient, human earth relationship, which I think is more of the goal that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
We need to come from a place of, it is more than just consuming, it is cohabitating, it is coalescing, it is having a sentient relationship. But again, if we want to get them to eat and we want them to think twice about running through the Bojangles, the Bojangles tomorrow morning with their kids on the way to school because it's year-round school, we can't just tell them, I'm sorry, the $6.99 bread was no good. We can't say, those animals.
But
why can't
we, Tatiana? Why?
We got to give them a point to start from. So you just said your CSA.
Okay,
your CSA, you push people away from it. Tell me what you're educating your potential members on, so that you realize what you're sharing with our people is not that you're discouraging them from coming to your CSA. You want them to be educated so they understand what they're getting. Correct?
Well, yeah, they need to understand the value of what it is that they're getting. Like, I'm not going to continue to have a discussion with someone who's going to tell me that we're too expensive, we're too expensive, we're too expensive. I think your priorities need to be adjusted.
Right.
And so
because food shouldn't be quick and cheap, correct?
Right. I mean, it's nutrition. You're on a cellular level, you're giving your body the building blocks for it to save its life or to commit suicide. And let's be honest, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Everyone who thinks that it's okay to live in denial and be irresponsible. I mean, because if you're listening to this or you ever have heard me say anything, then, people get mad about it, and that's okay. Because I am assaulting people. I'm not assaulting the people. I'm assaulting their truth or what they thought was the truth. And I was violated, right? And I feel like I was assaulted. And in fact, my child was murdered, if we want to talk about it in that way. So don't you think that I am going to do everything that I can to make sure that no one else experiences that? Like, what kind of human being would I be if I didn't try to stop that experience from happening to anyone else? Like, no one should ever know how I feel about that.
Yeah.
And I think that, and it is difficult for me to watch someone, consciously, I don't know, being irresponsible in that way. You can't listen to me and then unhear what I say.
So one of the big questions that I had for you, and we kind of pre-discussed this before the show, is how to help our listeners as consumers, because we are going to continue to consume. We need to eat. We need to clothe ourselves. There are things that are going to come into demand. How do we help our listeners as consumers become active, regenerative consumers?
Okay.
How do we teach them that?
Right. So, everyone feels like, okay, let's use Whole Foods as an example, that is going to be the safe place to eat. Well, why can't you just even if you go to your local farmer, okay, and you're buying something from the local farmer that even might be fed a GM feed, which is the same thing you're getting in the grocery store everywhere,
Explain
right?
GM feed.
So genetically modified, okay, in America, we have no animal feed standard. So all the animal feed is genetically modified grain, all of it. And if you want organic grain or organic feed, which, by the way, when I first started this CSA, we didn't have that accessible to us in North Carolina. So, it's been many years of fighting to try to even be able to have clean feed here. But I say start by supporting a local farmer who's interested in trying to do the right thing, even if they're not doing it all the way. If their animals have a little bit of grass, but they're on maybe the incorrect feed, then let me tell you, any amount of grass that they eat is going to be bigger and better, because that animal can use the grass and the chlorophyll and all the medicine out of the grass and of the soil to, kind of detox themselves from the side effects of that grain. Is it completely clean? No, it is not.
But it's a step in the right direction.
It is. If you're in a grocery store right now, then step one, buy food from any grass-based farmer. It doesn't matter if their feed is horrible.
So look for that label, grass-fed, high forage, that type of thing?
Well, no. Talk to the farmer. Stop looking at labels. Hashtag quit reading labels like that. Find somebody who has meat that doesn't have a label on it. How about that? How about buy food that has no barcode? Find a farmer that has to pull a scale out and weigh your meat and charge you whatever he's going to charge you per pound, and do the math, okay? And just make a decision that you're not going to eat meat from anywhere unless it comes from grass. If you don't want to eat meat, fine. Get milk, get butter, get something from somebody who you can put your eyes on, and do the same thing with the produce. And if you start buying your meat and vegetables, just make a commitment this year, or, like, actually, before you even do that, if you want to remediate your health, like, just take one big step. Quit eating wheat. Like, how about that? How about you just decide that this year I'm not going to eat wheat and I'm never going to eat it again?
And the Europeans are rolling in their fields with their wine when you make that kind of statement, because, of course, that's their staff of life. But again,
we're not in Europe, and we're in America.
They're growing it very differently, and of course, their butter and a lot of their fat-based, animal proteins, their butters, their cheese, etc., is grown and created completely differently.
Not all
of
it,
here.
Tatiana. They have GMOs over there too. There's some wars happening in Europe as well, but there's still a chance of being able to find it better. I even was just in India, and I've traveled around the world, and I'm telling you that everyone acts like it's just something that's happening in America, and that's a lie. Mm-hmm. The truth is that it's not okay to eat it ever. How about that? How about we just say, we're just not going to eat wheat anymore? If you do one thing like that, and I'm not saying go gluten-free and go buy a bunch of, barcode boxes and bags that say gluten-free on them. I'm saying just don't eat wheat.
But there was a recent study that showed a list of cereals, and this came out, and I know that this was all over social media, that I think it was Cheerios, regular plain Cheerios, most of us grew up with that was so completely saturated in, as you said, the desiccation, the drying in its processing to turn those oats into cereal.
How about don't eat cereal? How about don't eat cereal ever? So cereal, there's a book called Cereal Killers. You guys should look it up. So I think that cereal is not food. I mean, here's the test.
You're talking to Americans, Niti. You've got to help them get a grasp on.
By the way, I was born in America. Okay,
that's right.
I know I look Indian and everything, but I was born and raised right here. And I will tell you this. Cereal, this is what I said to my kids, because you think my kids didn't want to eat cereal? I told my children, I said, if you can figure out how to make it from whole foods, like some real food item, you can eat it. If you can figure out how to make some cereal out of something that is like whole and real, then you can eat it. For example, Rice Krispies. What is that? I have no idea what that is. I don't know how to make it. I don't know how my kids could ever figure out. I told them they could research all over Google and tell me how to make cereal. So, I mean, let's just make it simple, okay? Don't eat cereal ever, and quit eating wheat. Now, if you just do those two things for this year, awesome. You'll feel better, and you won't even know why. Then next year, how about you say, okay, I'm only going to, and maybe while you're not eating the wheat, you can try to find a farmer raising some meat and figure out how you're going to schedule it so that you're going to go and buy your meat from that person, whoever it is. Anybody is better than the grocery store.
So you're saying meat, but I know that you work with, fowl and getting duck eggs, chicken eggs. I know that you work with the local fishermen off the North Carolina coast. Tell us a little bit about how you source for the highest standard so that we can help our listeners also know what they can look for.
So I mean, that requires relationships, and that's what I'm asking everyone to do. I'm asking you to start building relationships with local people, and I'm talking about farmers that are raising livestock and plants. How about that? And get whatever you can from them, and just don't eat wheat. How about just do that for 1 year?
Did you make some suggestions to some of the local farmers, so the local growers, etc., when you were letting them know what you were looking for? Did you notice that your interest in your education even adjusted or expanded on their ideas of what they wanted to do?
Yeah. In fact, the truth is that nobody was farming 100% the way I needed them to.
For your standards for the CSA?
For my standards for the CSA, when I started it in 2009, then there was no 100% grass-fed beef. There wasn't. And why? Because there was no one who was going to buy it. And it was going to cost what it cost, and there wasn't a beef farmer around who was going to do it. And even when I would meet them and talk to them, it took 2.5 years for, these old timers, because I was dealing with old timers, to believe this little Indian woman was going to be able to sell this meat, because they were like, Niti, nobody's going to buy that, and you can't tell people how to eat. And I'm like, yeah, you can, because that's what people want. They want you to tell them what to eat. And they said, no, you can't do that. And I said, okay, well, can I get the beef from you? And you just don't worry about that part. And, and so finally, that was the way it worked. The way that it worked was, that isn't completely how it worked. I had one guy who allowed me to buy beef from him, and he committed to raising beef only for me and growing it. We grew it from a little lunchbox-sized cooler of beef to an entire steer, to 2 steers, and
your membership gets to grow because now you've got more that's available to your CSA.
And what's even more interesting is the more you eat this way, the less you eat. So the
body gets its nutrients, is what you're saying.
Oh yeah,
it's not empty calories.
Right, they become satiated. So anyone who's eating this way, I can always know, like if someone joins the CSA and they're only eating food from me, then within 6 months their grocery bill's gonna fall. They're gonna come in and they start apologizing to me. Oh, I'm so sorry. Like we're just not that hungry. And I'm like, yeah, I already knew that. Like this is the only business model in which I already know that the longer that people are in the membership, the less they're going to eat over time because they just can't consume that much. So imagine how many more people I have to develop and grow as regenerative consumers to get it so that my farms can actually grow to volume.
Right.
But what's even more interesting right now, Tatiana, I think, is that our grass-fed beef price is, if you're participating in the CSA and you're doing the subscriptions and stuff, it's $9.75 a pound. And you go into any of the grocery stores that have grass-fed beef, which doesn't meet my standard at all, and it's $9.50 or something, a pound, and it isn't 100% grass-fed and grass-finished. In fact, they carry them over the winters with grain, which is GMO, and they can, and still call it grass-fed. And they don't raise their animals out like we do for 3 years, because no one is going to carry that risk over 2 winters. No one is. And even my beef ranchers are like, they do it for me. And then, and that's it. But I had to commit to the farms that I was going to purchase everything that they produced. Otherwise, it wasn't going to work, because I didn't want, they couldn't use poison anywhere on their land. And
that was a real game changer for them, I'm sure. They needed to know that you could prove the concept so that it would end up being a win-win for both of you in the long run.
And so for that reason, it was, I started in 2009 until 2013, we weren't 100% GMO free. And when I told the farms this year, we have to all go completely GMO free, are you in or are you out? Then there were several farms that pulled out, and then there were other new farms that stepped up to the plate. And it was a real major transition moment. And at that time, I remember it was the first time since 2009 that we raised prices, because it was the only thing that was going to adjust our pricing, was that we were going to be 100% GMO free. And then now we're feeling a little bit of a shift in the pricing one more time, but from 2003 to 2017,
that's very impressive.
You have a 50-cent raise. So what I'm telling everybody is that the people out there that think you can't afford it, it's nonsense.
Help them understand what they're getting, though, Niti, because we're kind of getting close to the hour.
Okay.
When you say GMO, you're talking about genetically modified organisms, right? Genetically
Yes.
modified.
And glyphosate, which is
They're
Roundup.
they're going to usually be infused with one degree or another of, Roundup ready. It's already in the grain. Then they generally are
And then they're
sprayed on top of the
sprayed.
fields.
Yes.
On top of that, and now we know a third element is they're being dried in it. So
Yes.
it's poison on poison on poison on poison, and we still don't even have all the studies back in yet.
Well,
what
how
that does
about
to a
it's
human body.
man-made with poison and poison and poison?
Exactly.
Because that's what, I mean, and then again, I have all these folks that are like, well, where's your scientific proof? Well, I don't know. If you require scientific proof to understand that man-made is never going to be superior to what is natural, that's number one.
Mm-hmm.
And then number two, that science is simply the study of nature, because we don't know it all, and nature has it all figured out. Then, I don't know. I mean, it was a no-brainer for me to completely commit to having faith and belief that our food was going to be more powerful if we respected nature.
Mm-hmm.
And it is. And that's the other thing. We're reversing cancers. I mean, even when you listen to my daughter's story and you see that we were able to arrest her solid mass tumor in 4 months with food. Mm-hmm. And by the way, that wasn't even perfect food, because
it was the best you knew at the time.
It was the best that we could get, because the farms weren't raising the best at the time. So
every single time our body experiences, apoptosis, cells
Yes.
die, cells are reborn, that's what we talk about, having the telomeres, and every single time, our cells divide, we're growing a new version of ourselves. It does make sense. The proper nutrition is going to grow healthier cells.
And sun.
Toxic food.
And air. And sleep and rest. I mean, if you want to have healthy mitochondria, then the only way to do that is to allow yourself proper rest, respect circadian rhythm, make sure you go outside and get sunlight. And, and by the way, I have posts on my Facebook about how to use natural oils for sunscreen. People don't understand that either. They're just drowning themselves in poison, drowning their food in poison, and then asking what standard is going to be okay.
Well, you're waking them up from being consumers, because remember, that's what they've been told. A lot of us are just doing what we were told, and that's a big can of worms we can't actually go into. We got 1 minute on the hour. Let's just talk about, for those of us that are looking to just start somewhere outside the grocery store.
Sure.
Would you recommend that people hit those little, fresh produce booths as they're going down the country roads? I walked right past a melon farmer, or drove past a melon farmer on the way here. Tell people where to start in 30 seconds or less. And again, those 2 sites that you recommend for those that are looking for CSAs. Would you do that for us, please?
Sure. So first, I say eat local. That's step 1. Step 2 is build a relationship with someone local. Tell them what you're looking for, because you'll be surprised at who won't work hard to try to fill, and step up to the plate, because they just are looking for consumers.
Great.
So tell them that. You can actually tell them about me. Tell them to talk to me, because we even coach the farms that are interested in becoming regenerative how to do it if they're interested in doing that.
Okay.
And then 3, I would say, don't eat wheat. And by the way, I want to just add real quick, Tatiana. I mean, I don't want anyone out there to feel like I'm judging you, because I was the biggest dummy of them all. Like, don't be like me. Okay? I want you to do better than me.
It was a hard one lesson, wasn't it, Niti? This was not an easy ride to this level of education and understanding that you've cultivated.
It wasn't. And I was just, I was going with the flow like everybody and believing everything. And, I was the same person who went to the grocery store and saw the all-natural labeled chicken thinking like, oh, that's great marketing.
Yes, yes. So that's the difference, isn't it?
It is.
In summation, we need to be educated consumers.
Yes.
And the regenerative concept is, how does my food show up on my plate? What was the process to get it here? Is it a regenerative concept? Does it continue to feed the earth for generations to come? Yes. We really wanted to bring you solutions tonight. It's such a huge topic. We're going to be revisiting this over the course of time. But I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. And I want to remind you, you are the solution.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.